Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today we're going to talk about some books that I just cannot remember. Now, I was inspired to do this video by a couple of things. The first being that I had recently reread The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot, and because it had been so long since I had read it, I could not remember anything, and it was like a brand new book for me. And so I thought, what else can I not remember that I probably should reread and get enjoyment out of it again? And the other inspiration was Brian over at Bookish also did a similar video. So today I have 5 books that we are going to talk about that I just cannot remember. The first one being The Paying Guests by Sarah Waters. Now, Sarah Waters is a very well-known author, and I read The Paying Guests for a book club maybe 10 years ago. And I just cannot remember anything about it. I can't remember the plot. I can't remember how I felt. Normally, if I can't remember a book that I've read, I generally can remember how I felt about it. Whether, I loved it, I hated it, or whatever. I generally remember the feeling. And unfortunately, I cannot remember how I felt about The Paying Guests. So, The Paying Guests is set in 1922 in England, I believe in London, where spinster Frances lives with her genteel mother, Mrs. Ray, and mourns the death of her brothers in the Great War. Her father has died, leaving considerable debts, and they are obliged to take in lodgers, Lillian and Leonard Barber, of the clerk class. So that must mean that they are lower class than what Frances currently is. The guests bring with them color, fun, and music, but also stir dangerous desires in Frances. Now that sounds great. I just cannot remember. I can't remember the book. I can't remember the story. I can't remember anything. So I think I need to reread this book and hope that I like it again, I think. Next, we have White Teeth by Zadie Smith. I believe this was Zadie Smith's debut novel, and it was published in 2000, and I believe was also shortlisted for the Women's Prize in 2000. I read this probably 2001-ish because I do remember it was around the time that I was graduating college. And I do remember liking it, but I literally cannot remember anything about the book. I do remember that I liked Smith's prose. One of the most talked about fictional debuts of recent years, White Teeth is a funny, generous, big-hearted novel adored by critics and readers alike, dealing, among other things, with friendship, love, war, 3 cultures and 3 families over 3 generations, one brown mouse, in the tricky way the past has of coming back and biting you on the ankle. It is a life-affirming, riotous must-read of a book. So this sounds great, and I really just wish I could remember it. I have read another one of Smith's books on beauty, and I do still have it, and that is also due for a reread. I do remember not liking it as much as White Teeth. So, but I just cannot remember why. So that's another book that I can't remember too much about it, but I do remember that I liked White Teeth a lot, and I just liked her prose. So this is definitely due for a reread. Next, we have The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbary. I read this for a book club about 10 years ago, probably the same book club as I read The Paying Guests. And I recently picked this up because I realized I could not remember anything about it. And I probably should reread it. I can't, and this is another situation where I can't remember how I felt. Whereas for White Teeth, I do remember that I liked it. For this, I cannot remember. And maybe that's a good sign, maybe that's a bad sign. I don't know. But this is translated from the French by Alison Anderson. In addition to being a novelist, Muriel Barbary is also a philosophy teacher, according to Wikipedia, so take that for what you will. And this book follows events in the life of a concierge whose deliberately concealed intelligence is uncovered by an unstable but intellectually precocious girl named Paloma. And Paloma is the daughter of an upper-class family living in the hotel where this concierge works. And this is full of allusions to literary works, music, films, paintings, and incorporates themes relating to philosophy, class consciousness, and personal conflict. And that all sounds great. And this must be the Paloma character. You've got the young girl. So yeah, so this seems interesting. I just can't remember anything about it. Next we have Ahab's Wife by Sena Naslund. Now, I read this probably around the same time as I read White Teeth, and I remember absolutely loving this. This book is narrated by Una Spencer, who was Captain Ahab's wife from Moby Dick fame, written by Herman Melville. Now, I don't know if Moby Dick actually mentions Captain Ahab having a wife, but that's irrelevant. And the first, sentence of this book grabs you. And she says, Captain Ahab was neither my first husband nor my last. And she's just basically telling her story of her life before, during, and after her marriage with Captain Ahab. And I just wish I could remember it. I remember loving it. I remember loving Naslund's prose. But I just don't remember the story. So this is something I definitely do want to reread and experience again. And last we have The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. I read this in the early 2000s. Now that I think about it, 3 of these books I read in the early 2000s and I can't remember. So apparently over 20 years is my limit. So this was, I believe this won the Booker. I don't know when, if this was written in like 2000, 2001-ish, so it was probably won the Booker around that time. The novel opens with these simple, resonant words. 10 days after the war ended, my sister Laura drove a car off a bridge. They are spoken by Iris, whose terse account of her sister's death in 1945 is followed by an inquest report proclaiming the death accidental. But just as the reader expects to settle into Laura's story, Atwood introduces a novel within a novel. Entitled The Blind Assassin, it is a science fiction story told by 2 unnamed lovers who meet in a dingy backstreet room. When we return to Iris, it is through a 1947 newspaper article announcing the discovery of a sailboat carrying the dead body of her husband, a distinguished industrialist. This is also one that I can't remember how I felt about it. It seems like an interesting premise. I have read Margaret Atwood before. I've read The Handmaid's Tale, which traumatized me. But I just don't remember this. And I do think I want to read more of Atwood. So I'm going to reread this, reorient myself with Margaret Atwood, and then decide if I'm going to pick up any more of her works. So there we go. 5 books that I cannot remember. Some I remember how I felt when I read them. Some I can't remember how I felt. But some were read 10 years ago. Some were read about 20 years ago. So all of these books do deserve a reread so I can reorient myself with these authors. Are there any books that you cannot remember? Any books that you would like to reread? And are there any books that you can't remember the story, but you remember how you felt? Let me know what you think. Have you read any of these? Did you like any of them? Did you dislike any of them? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining and have a great day. Bye.